because the definition isn't just a part of the power structure. You have to have the ability to change and to affect the livelihood of another ethnicity. And black people don't hold any of those positions. And so one of those terms is racism, right?
Right.
And so racism has to be viewed a particular way, in such a way that black people can't fall in that category of being a racist. Now I want to read something, and let me get this this lady's name. Her name is Simone Samuels. She's recognized by the Medium as a top writer in racism. And she wrote this in an article last year in 2020. And this was her writing an article about the fact, supposedly, that black people can't be racist. And so this is what she says. If racism is about power, and I believe any accurate definition of racism must take power into account, and if racism is about oppression, at least on some level, as I have asserted that it is, and if power is determined by white supremacy and one's proximity to whiteness, and if contextually speaking, the holders of racial power in our society are white, then black people cannot be racist. Do you agree with this definition of racism?
Of course not.
Why not?
You already knew the answer to the question before. It's kind of like rhetorical. Of course not.
Right. Why not?
Yeah. So let me back up. Can I go in reverse? Because something she said, I think is so funny. Funny and yet sad at the same time is this proximity to whiteness.
Right.
Because I start thinking of my Asian brothers, right? I start thinking of other people that are called like the new white. You know what I mean? And so there's this whole idea of proximity where you kind of assimilate and put on kind of the white clothes, so to speak. You kind of dress, you kind of put on that persona. And so I think she's alluding to that because then what it does, it becomes us versus them. Us versus them. So remember the whole idea. This is pure Marxist thinking. And I don't want anyone to lose sight of the common themes, even in this definition, power. So the whole idea that you only can be racist if you are a part of the power class. I disagree with it because it doesn't fundamentally come from a biblical worldview. Jesus said in Mark 7 that all that defiles a man comes from within the man. And when Jesus made that statement, ladies and gentlemen, he wasn't thinking about this group versus that group. He was talking about this is a universal issue of the heart. And so, yes, the issue is that definition has been modified. And that one of the things I was going to mention before you mentioned the thing about the sex workers is there's this whole idea that what's going on with the civil rights movement is just a continuation, but it's actually a distortion of the civil rights movement, because the civil rights movement rightly focused on equality of all people, and it wasn't looking at groups. This new movement that says it's the new civil rights movement. In fact, that's what BLM said. We're not your grandfather's or your grandmother's civil rights movement, or whatever they said. Mm-hmm. Well, you're not even a civil rights movement. You're a counterfeit. Okay. But what it is they're focusing on one group versus another group. That's not civil rights. That's not the historic civil rights movement. But they want to claim that they're the continuation of it. So in that definition, and I wanted to bring that out because I knew if I didn't say I was going to forget it. So I finally got that out. But in that definition, we see that whole idea of power dynamics, that unless you have power, you can't be racist. No, what we're doing now, we're redefining sin. We're redefining what's clearly taught as biblical hamartiology. That is the biblical concept of sin. Because now the issue is who's the greatest sinner? Remember how earlier in our conversation I said there's one of the examples of what's going on with critical race theory is the 1619 Project that's being pumped into school districts all over the country and indoctrinating the minds of young people. Why did they start at 1619? Because what they're trying to do, just like this young lady's trying to do with her definition, is to create what I call who's the biggest sinner. Because what we need to do, if we have a right view of injustice, and we should have a right view of justice, we need to look at world history. And when we look at world history, what we discover, no one can claim, based on their melanin, that anyone has the monopoly on sin. Because what we find is that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. See, the biblical record is consistent with history. But if your history starts as, conveniently at a certain place in time to produce a certain narrative, and you conveniently forget everything that became before it, you're not a truth teller, ladies and gentlemen. You're just telling your narrative for a specific purpose and specific end.
Now, would you agree that even with their definition, black people can be racist? Because
of course, that's why if anyone didn't catch what I was saying, that's what I was saying.
Right, because when you talk about power structures, it's this embedded systemic thing, but
Right.
it all has to do with this power structure.
Right.
And
Well-
wouldn't you say a power structure is one of those power structures be the ability to direct the thinking in the direction of a society through laws, and just this kind of a movement that can impact your business closing tomorrow because you didn't put up this
Yeah, I like
box.
where you're going.
Right?
I like where you're going.
Right. It's changing laws to where the church might have to move
Yeah.
in a certain direction. Your school now has to
Yeah.
indoctrinate kids with this thinking. And so
Yeah.
if this power structure is being
Yeah.
headed and led
Right.
by black people,
Yeah.
can't you say, well, if the definition of because
Yeah.
the definition isn't just a part of the power structure, you have to have the ability to change and to affect the livelihood
Right.
of another ethnicity, and black
Right.
people don't hold any of those positions. However,
Yes.
if you offend me, guess what? You can lose your job tomorrow as a white person because you offended
So-
a black. So I can affect
so-
your livelihood.
So let's talk about the fallacy of that definition, because I think that's what you're uncovering. It's the self-stultification of that definition. It's a self-stultifying thing. It's like there's an internal contradiction, and the issue is this: the very people who are propagating this definition, actually, that definition applies to them. That's what we're ultimately saying, and the reason why we know it's true is because look at the evidence we see around us. If you don't virtual signal, if you don't subscribe, jump on the bandwagon, if you don't say the right thing at the right time, you will be canceled. Now, how can you be canceled if you lack the power to cancel that person, that organization, that individual? So power goes both ways, ladies and gentlemen. This whole definition that only the definition of I call it the almighty, all-powerful white man, that's kind of what they're holding up, that controls all things. That doesn't hold water, right? Because what we see ultimately is that the very people who are touting this perspective seem to be quite powerful themselves. So in light of that, but here's the thing, that shows you how that proposition just crumbles. The plane doesn't get off the ground, ladies and gentlemen, because what ultimately happens when they present this definition, they have to turn around. When they point one finger at one group, is point three fingers back at themselves, because they're applying that same thing. Here's the other thing, in order to quote unquote deal with racism, you have to be a racist to deal with racism in their paradigm.